CIT 1121, Module 10, Submodule 3, Configuring the Default Gateway. Let's take a look at two scenarios here. First one is a host that wants to gain access to a host on another network. When a device wants to gain access to a host on another network, the original host, in this case, host PC1, needs to send the information across the router, in this case, router 1. And the only way that's going to happen across this switch is PC1 has to know the MAC address of the router interface G0/0, right? We went through this in another slide. Hopefully this is making sense, and this default procedure is something that you are familiar with. But in order to get across the router, the only way you're going to get to that router across the switch that only reads MAC addresses, is to put the destination MAC address in the frame header of the router interface, and the destination IP address would be the IP address of the actual destination. When the router receives the information, looks at its routing table, it makes a forwarding decision that says, oh, sure, you want to go to PC3? I know where that is. That's 192.168.11.10. I can get to that 192.168.11.0/24 network by forwarding into interface G0/1. When it gets here, it does an ARP broadcast message, and it asks for device 11.10. PC3 responds, and then the router sends its information to the PC. PC3 then wants to respond back to PC1. PC3 needs the MAC address of router interface G0/0. I'm trying a lot of circles on here. But hopefully you've got the idea. I know we went through this in other presentations. It's one of the key concepts in all of CIT 1121 is how ARP works. So if you don't know, go back and watch those ARP videos again. I know we kind of did it fast here, but this is something that you should have already seen, and this process should be familiar to you. Okay, second piece of this is the switches involved. Now, one of the things that we kind of just glossed over a little bit is that switches are getting IP addresses. In this case, they put the network IDs next to these switches, but you can put an IP address on a switch. You may have even done a lab where you were like, oh yeah, let's go to interface VLAN 1, INT, right, VLAN 1, and then after that you put in an IP address of whatever the IP address is in the subnet mask, and then that was an address that you could put on a switch. Now the address that you're putting on that switch is only there so you can use Telnet or SSH to configure it. So if you don't have to configure a switch, you don't have to put an IP address on it. You can definitely make communications pass through. The CAM table that the switch uses has nothing to do with the IP address that you put on there. The IP address is there just so there's a way to remotely manage the device. I'm not sure we totally get that from the labs and from the videos, but I just wanted to cover that one more time. Second thing is this: after you put the IP address in on interface VLAN 1, you have to do an exit, and then you have to put in a default gateway, and that's this piece here. This is bullet point 2. You'll use the IP default gateway command on the switch. Same deal. If you wanted to gain access to this switch remotely, and you wanted to manage it from over here, from one of these devices, something that's not on the same network, the default gateway here has to be correct, and it's going to be the IP address of the router interface, just like you did with the PCs. So remember, all devices on the same LAN have the exact same IP default gateway IP address, and that is the address of the router interface that is connected to that LAN.